from 149 in 2008 to 512 last year. The number of militias alone surged from 42 in 2008 to 127 last year. So the question is, why Michigan? Why is that fertile ground for these organizations? Samuel Jacobs is a reporter for the Daily Beast. Samuel, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Tamara.
So after the Oklahoma City bombings, I spent a lot of time with some members of the Texas militia, and the group all but dispersed after that incident happened for fear of retaliation and some other issues, like they didn't want to pay taxes. But Michigan is a hot spot. Why Texas and Michigan, especially with what we're seeing in the news?
Well, obviously Michigan's in the news, and we're forced to ask, why are the militias so popular there? And while experts point out that the militia growth has been a national phenomenon, I think there are three good reasons for why we're seeing militias have taken such a strong hold in the state of Michigan. The first, obviously, is the economy. Perhaps nowhere else in the country has there been a state that's been so hard hit. While our national unemployment average hovers around 10%, the state average is 14%. And if you look at the county where this current militia that was operating out of, you look at that county, its unemployment rate was around 17%. The second issue is that Michigan has traditionally been a home for extremists. It's, been very accepting and tolerant of groups that have often been highly intolerant themselves. And the third thing, I think, is you see that Michigan has a proud gun culture. I talked to some a militia commander yesterday who told me that when people grow up in the backwoods countries and they see men shooting guns, it's not something that alarms them. It's just part of the regular life there. So I think if you look at those three things combined, you really have a sort of perfect storm that creates the elements for this kind of growth and this kind of extremism.
Sam, what is the difference in a militia and what we're now calling patriot groups?
I think the significant difference is whether these groups are armed or not. Patriot groups may be ones that have an ideology that is in line with or that share some of the same thoughts and fears that militia groups have, but the militia groups primarily are about their guns. If you visit these websites for the groups in Michigan and throughout the country, as I've been doing this week, you see the Second Amendment posted straight at the top of most of these sites. For them, gun use is sort of a central issue, and I think that's what distinguishes these groups.
And back to when I told you I covered the Texas militia, one of the reasons they let me in was because I was an African-American woman, and they wanted to try to prove that they were not about race hate and some other things that have been associated with militias. But I look at this video, we look at the people who were arrested in Michigan. Is this primarily a white male movement?
It definitely is a white male, typically middle-aged movement. If you look at this, there was a family, really, a white family that was centered around, and the county that they were operating out of is 95% Caucasian. However, militia groups have gone very far in the last week to point out that their reaction isn't first one of racism. They say that we were around before, say, President Obama was elected. And I do think that their primary concern has to do with a fear of globalized government, a fear that our current military isn't going to be there to protect them in case of some sort of conflict. And so while race clearly foments an atmosphere and creates sort of extremist views, the militias themselves aren't primarily about race.
All right, Samuel Jacobs, a reporter with the Daily Beast. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, the former head of the Gambino crime family gets ready